The first thing I notice is the weight of the hospital folder in my hand. Heavy, glossy, the kind of red you see on warning labels and stop signs. It's already creased at the corners from the number of times I've gripped it too tightly. I'm standing just outside the glass-walled conference room, the chill of the air conditioning prickling over my neck, and beside me is Natalie, my daughter-in-law, my partner in this fight, her hand shaking a little as she smooths her skirt. I'm Linda Carver, I'm 56 years old, and I'm not afraid of many things. Not angry clients, not smirking prosecutors, not even the old men on the law firm committee who think my pearls mean I won't bite. But right now, I am terrified, because my 5-year-old grandson's life might depend on what happens in the next hour. And I am furious, because we shouldn't have had to come this far. There are voices inside the room, low, deliberate, the kind of voices that decide the fate of people they've never met. Through the glass, I can see the hospital administrator, bald and immaculate in his navy suit, leafing through a sheaf of papers that I know isn't nearly as important as my folder. My mother-in-law's voice carries in a way that seems to penetrate every wall in the building. Clipped, practiced, a lifetime of getting exactly what she wants. Natalie glances at me, her lips are pressed tight, and she's clutching her notebook, a pale blue thing lined with sticky notes in every color of the rainbow. She's made a list of every contact, every argument, every dollar, every date. We're ready. Still, I can see the way her shoulders tense when the door opens with a sharp click. "Mrs. Carver, they're ready for you," the assistant says, not looking either of us in the eye. For a moment, Natalie and I stand unmoving, and I count my breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I open the folder just enough to peek at the sticky note Natalie stuck inside. May 3rd, 2:13 p.m. Margaret's call confirmed. Her precise handwriting calms me as much as my own training ever could. We step inside together. The air in the room is thick with perfume and disinfectant, and Margaret sits at the far end of the table in an ivory suit, a silk scarf twisted tight around her throat. She doesn't even look at Natalie. My husband Michael is there, but his eyes are fixed on his folded hands. I place the red folder carefully, directly on the gleaming surface of the table. 11 sets of email printouts, the insurance denial, the doctor's desperate note. It's all here. The administrator leans forward, unimpressed or maybe just bored. "Let's get started," Margaret says, and there is a 7-second pause before anyone else speaks. I count each one, like heartbeats. Natalie doesn't flinch. I know some of you are watching this with your own stories of hospital hallways and impossible choices. Tell me where you're from and if you've ever had to fight for someone you love. I wish the world didn't make it necessary. My voice is steady as I speak. My name is Linda Carver. This is my daughter-in-law, Natalie. We're here about my grandson, Ben. And before we begin, I want the record to show that we have documented every step of this process. Outside, the Texas sun beats hot against the windows, but in here, everything feels frozen, a single moment stretching back over decades, all the way to the first time I learned what it meant to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves. And I remember how Natalie and I came to stand shoulder to shoulder, facing this storm together. The first time I learned to count seconds in a silence, I was 8 years old, standing at the edge of our kitchen in Garland, Texas, clutching a spelling test with a red 94 circled at the top. My mother had her back to me, dinner bubbling on the stove, the staccato rhythm of her wooden spoon the only sound. My older brother Mark, golden child, straight-backed and grinning, had just handed over his own test. Perfect, again, a 100, a neat smiley face from Mrs. Jitz. Walker in the corner, I held my breath, watched my mother's shoulder blades tighten beneath her floral blouse and waited. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That was how long she paused before turning to me, the smile already on her lips for Mark stretching a little too thin for me. "Maybe next time, Linda," she said, voice soft, unreadable. "You just don't focus the way your brother does." I got used to those silences, used to Mark's loud triumphs and my own small victories passing unnoticed. Every piano recital, every library prize, tucked neatly behind the noise of his baseball trophies and honor roll certificates. By the time I was 12, I developed the habit of filing things away the way other girls collected friendship bracelets or movie ticket stubs, little mental folders of dates and numbers every time I'd quietly succeeded. Every time I'd watch someone else take credit for something I'd built. It never occurred to me that I'd need those skills for something more than my own peace of mind. Decades later, I realized that was how people like Margaret Carver got away with everything. These women who knew how to fill every silence with meaning, who could command a room with a single glance and leave you counting the seconds just to keep from drowning. I met Margaret for the first time when I was 25, and Michael brought me home for Thanksgiving. Her house was a museum, all cream carpets and glass cabinets, every surface dustless. Margaret was gracious, in the way a queen is gracious to a guest whose name she's already forgotten. I counted the seconds in her pauses too. 7, always 7, even when she smiled at me and tilted her head, assessing. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Linda," she said, her hand light and dry in mine. "Michael's told us so much about you. Law school, yes?" Such a competitive field for a girl from Garland. I smiled. Tight, the same smile I'd learned from my mother, and told her yes, Southern Methodist University, top of my class. She didn't ask about my parents, of course. Margaret never asked questions she didn't already know the answers to, or that might lower her estimation of you. Part of me always assumed that when I had my own family, I'd leave that world of counting seconds behind. I built a different kind of home with Michael, or tried to. One where no one's silence hung heavy in the air. We had Ethan, our only child, and I swore I wouldn't let him feel invisible, no matter how bright the world wanted him to shine. But you can't outrun family currents just by wishing, not when they flow through old money and generations of pride. Ethan grew up kind, smart, the sort of boy who got along with everyone. I could see Margaret looking at him, the way she'd looked at Michael, appraising, always, waiting to see if he'd bring home someone worthy. When he introduced us to Natalie, I saw the hesitation in his eyes. He knew exactly what Margaret would think. Natalie was not what the Carvers had in mind. Her father a mechanic, her mother a nurse. She wore cheap canvas shoes with her teacher's badge, and she shook Margaret's hand with a confidence that had nothing to do with money. I liked her instantly. So did Michael. But Margaret only arched an eyebrow and said, "Third grade, is it? How? Noble?" Even as Natalie turned pink, she met Margaret's gaze. "I think teaching is the most important thing I could do," she said, her voice clear, no tremor at all. That was the moment I knew. Natalie was made of steel under all that caring, and she would survive anything. The first real bond between Natalie and me was forged, oddly, over school supplies. Ethan was out of town for work, and Ben was just a toddler, still waking up at night. I dropped by with a bag of groceries after court one Thursday in August, the kind of Texas day where the heat presses down on you like a hand. The house was chaos, Ben shrieking with delight at a tower of blocks, peanut butter smeared on his cheek, and Natalie on her knees beside him, sorting colored pencils into plastic bins. "Sorry about the mess," she called, laughing, pushing hair out of her face. I watched her pause, hands on her thighs, eyes closing for one long second. Some days I feel like I'm running a marathon in quicksand. I knelt beside her, setting down the bag. "If you ever need backup, I can be the enforcer. I'm intimidating in a courtroom, so I hear." She looked at me, and it was like watching someone realize the cavalry had arrived. "Would you really?" she asked, almost as if she didn't quite believe me. "Absolutely. I have a mean voice for PTA meetings." I grinned, and she grinned back, and that was the beginning. There were so many small moments after that parent-teacher nights where I stood at her side when Margaret tried to undermine her. "If you'd gone into something more lucrative, perhaps you wouldn't be so tired, dear." Holidays where Natalie and I passed each other looks across the table, silently counting the seconds of Margaret's pointed silences. Ben's first fever when Natalie called me at midnight, voice shaking, asking if I thought she should go to the ER. I was there in 15 minutes, pajamas tossed over my suit, my briefcase still in the car. By the time Ben was 3, Natalie had become as much my family as Ethan or Michael ever were. We shared everything, recipes, stories, the little victories that no one else seemed to notice. When Ben started preschool last year, she called me at work just to tell me he'd made it through circle time without crying. "It's silly," she said, but I heard the pride in her voice. I never told Natalie how much it meant to me, having another woman in the family who understood, who didn't use silence as a weapon, who knew that a sticky note on the fridge, "Don't forget to breathe," could be worth more than a bouquet of lilies at a funeral. It wasn't until the spring Ben turned 5, though, that I realized just how strong we were together. Ben had been sick for weeks, low fevers that wouldn't break, strange rashes coming and going, bruises that didn't fade as quickly as they should. Natalie was the first to worry, though the pediatrician kept waving it off as viruses. By April, she was keeping a notebook, dates, times, symptoms, every detail written in the same neat looping hand she used for lesson plans. I noticed how tired she looked, the way she'd stare at Ben across the dinner table and bite her lip, trying not to show her fear. April 14th, 2023. That's the date burned into me. 7 letters in autoimmune. I was in court when the call came, a number I didn't recognize. It was Ethan's voice, but shaking. "Mom, it's serious. They think it's something rare. Can you come?" I was at the hospital in under 20 minutes. The minute I walked into the children's floor, I saw Natalie in the corner of the waiting area, her arms wrapped tight around herself. Ben was asleep across 2 chairs, a faded Spider-Man blanket crumpled at his feet. Natalie's eyes locked on mine, and she exhaled, a shuddering breath. "They're saying he needs special treatment, but it's not FDA approved for kids. Just, please read this." She handed me a sheaf of papers, a trembling blue sticky note attached. "Ask about Dr. Vance's protocol. Please." The next week blurred by in hospital rooms and insurance calls. Natalie and I moved like a team, her with her lists, me with my phone pressed to my ear, demanding answers. Ethan was there, but broken, hovering, his hands never quite steady, Michael cycling through coffee runs and quiet hand squeezes. It was Natalie and I who never left Ben's side, never let the nurses brush us off. That's when Margaret really began to make herself known. She visited once, gliding in with Harold beside her, a basket of expensive fruit in tow. Margaret's voice was soft, almost kind, if you didn't know her rhythms. "You poor dears," she said, laying a manicured hand on Ben's forehead as if she could will him better. "These hospitals can be so inefficient. If you need anything, you only have to ask." But the way she looked at Natalie, you would think she was the problem, not the cure. After she left, Natalie's hand shook as she wrote another note. Margaret, April 16th, said she'd make a call if necessary. She stuck it in her notebook, eyes hard. "She wants control," she whispered. "She always does." I squeezed her shoulder. "She doesn't get it, not this time." The insurance denial came on May 2nd, a crisp letter in the mail, the hospital's logo in sharp blue at the top. "We regret to inform you that coverage for intravenous immunotherapy has been denied at this time. Experimental status, not medically necessary. Please see attached itemization, $128,000. I read every word aloud. Natalie set a timer and we sat in silence for 7 seconds, letting the anger settle into resolve. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Natalie already at the table, files and sticky notes spread everywhere. She looked up, eyes red but determined. "Linda, I want to fight this," she said, her voice steady, "but I don't know how. I've never done this before." I placed my silver watch on the table right next to her legal pad. "You are not alone," I told her, the words heavier than any closing argument I'd ever made. "We'll do this together. I promise." We built our own war room in that kitchen. Natalie with her color-coded lists, me with my legal pads and case folders. We called every pediatric specialist in the city, pulled records, set up meetings with hospital admin. I taught Natalie how to draft formal appeals, how to frame arguments so they couldn't be ignored. She taught me the importance of documentation, every call logged by date and time, every promise written down. May 3rd, 2:13 p.m., that's the minute that changed everything. Natalie was on the phone with the insurance rep, on hold when she heard Margaret's name mentioned in the background. "Mrs. Carver, yes, she's on the board. She'll be in touch shortly." Natalie wrote it down instantly. Another sticky note, read this time, stuck right at the front of her folder. May 3, 2:13 p.m. Margaret's interference. That evening, I found Natalie in the hallway outside Ben's room, staring at her hands. "She's trying to stop us," she said quietly. "She called someone. She told them not to approve it because..." Natalie's eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice never wavered. "Because she wants to teach us a lesson. Because I'm not family enough." I felt something cold settle into my bones. All those years, all those silences, I'd always assumed Margaret just wanted to be obeyed, to be the most important voice in the room. But now she was using her connections, her status, to deny Ben a chance at life. That was unforgivable. I took Natalie's hand in both of mine. She doesn't get to decide who matters. We do. That was the night we put everything together, the red folder, the emails printed and arranged in order, every denial, every note from Ben's doctors, the sticky notes marking Margaret's calls, the bill with $128,000 circled in bold pen. We stayed up until 2 in the morning, cross-referencing every date, every promise broken. At 3 a.m., Ben woke up crying. Natalie flew to his side, scooping him into her arms, rocking him until the sobs faded. I watched her patience, her love, the way she whispered, "I've got you, baby, I've got you." I thought of every cold silence, every time someone tried to make her less than she was. I promised myself then and there that no one would ever make her or Ben feel invisible again. That's how the red folder came to be. Natalie called it our shield. I called it our receipts. We carried it into every meeting, every confrontation, and I watched the way Natalie's jaw would harden, the way she'd square her shoulders and look Margaret dead in the eye. I saw myself in her, and I saw something new too, hope. By the time we stepped into that glass-walled conference room, Natalie was more family to me than anyone I'd ever shared blood with. We weren't fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for Ben, and for every child who'd ever been told a 7-second silence meant they didn't matter. It was a Thursday morning, soft light spilling pale and watery through the kitchen windows when everything fell apart. I remember the way I stood at the counter stirring Ben's oatmeal, the scent of cinnamon fighting with the sour note of disinfectant that seemed to have seeped into every surface of their house. Natalie moved quietly behind me, her hair pulled up haphazardly, shadows hollowing her cheeks. Ben was curled on the couch, cartoons flickering blue across his face, too tired to protest the bland breakfast waiting for him. That morning, the phone started ringing before 8. The first 2 calls were routine, insurance follow-ups, polite but evasive, and then one from Michael letting me know he'd be late, the quarterly review running long. I was used to the gentle cacophony of phones and paperwork by then, but when Natalie's cell started buzzing, a premonition settled sharp in my stomach. She glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped into the dining room to answer. I heard only her side at first, quiet monosyllables, a fine thread of tension tightening with each word. "Yes, I see. No, I wasn't aware the board met this early. Thank you for letting me know." She reappeared in the kitchen, her face drawn, lips pressed thin. That was Mrs. Larkin, from the hospital billing office. I set down my spoon, suddenly cold all over. What did she say? Natalie placed her phone carefully on the table, as if afraid it might shatter. She wanted to apologize, she said. She thought we should know that someone from the hospital board contacted the insurance company directly and advised them to deny the treatment. She wouldn't say who, but it's Margaret, Linda, she actually called them, and she's coming over. For a moment, the world narrowed to sound, the refrigerator humming, Ben's soft cough from the couch, the faint thud of a car door outside. I forced myself to breathe, to focus, but inside I was trembling. I moved to the window and watched as Margaret's white Lexus glided to a stop in the driveway, immaculate as ever. Natalie straightened her shoulders. Don't let her talk to Ben. I nodded, already moving to intercept her at the door. Margaret let herself in without knocking, the scent of her heavy gardenia perfume preceding her. She wore her usual armor ivory suit, a pearl pin at her throat, lipstick set in a perfect bow. She didn't greet me, or Natalie. Her gaze swept the kitchen, not registering the mess of medical files and Natalie's sticky notes lining the fridge, not seeing Ben's pale face peeking from the living room. Margaret set her purse on the counter with a sharp click. Linda, Natalie, I'm going to be brief because this has gone on long enough. I called the hospital board this morning. It is not in Ben's best interest to pursue this foolish experimental treatment. Not in his best interest? My voice was low, dangerous. I saw Natalie clench her fists, knuckles whitening. Margaret raised her hand, silencing me as if I were a child. You are both too emotional to see clearly. You're letting desperation cloud your judgment, and you're embarrassing the family with these appeals. Do you know what it looks like for a Carver to be publicly begging the hospital for charity? I cannot allow it. I felt the seconds stretch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I counted them in the silence she left hanging, the unspoken threat laced through every word. Natalie's voice cut in, trembling with barely checked anger. He's your grandson. How could you go behind our backs and sabotage his only chance? Margaret's eyes flicked over Natalie, a chill in her smile. You never did understand this family, did you, Natalie? There are standards. The Carvers do not air their failures in public. And as for Ben, he'll get the best care available, no more, no less. I've spoken to Dr. Vance. He agrees there are other options. I swallowed every retort, every legal threat I wanted to throw in her face. Instead, I reached for the red folder, the proof of everything, the emails, the denials, the note in Natalie's looping hand. But Margaret's posture only stiffened. I'm telling you both now, she continued, her voice dropping to a silkier, more dangerous register. If you do not drop this ridiculous campaign and accept the board's recommendation, there will be consequences. For all of you. Ethan's job, Michael's position at the firm. Do you think the Carver name is untouchable? I can make things very difficult, Linda, especially for Natalie. She spat the name as if it tasted sour. I felt my breath catch. Margaret had never threatened me outright before, never made the unspoken so explicit. The thought of her reaching into every corner of our lives, using the old Carver connections to damage us, it made my skin crawl. But Natalie stepped forward, and her voice was so clear and steady it startled me. You can do whatever you want to me, Margaret, but you don't get to decide for Ben. Not now, not ever. Margaret laughed, a brittle sound colder than the tiles beneath our feet. You foolish girl, you think you matter just because Linda defends you? Family is who holds the purse strings. You were always just temporary. I saw Natalie flinch as if struck, but she didn't look away. My voice when it came was level. You've said what you came to say. Unless you have something new to add, I think you should leave. Her eyes lingered on me, assessing, searching for a crack. Then, finally, she gave a little sigh and reached for her purse. Have it your way, Linda, but you've chosen your side. Don't expect the family to clean up your mess when this falls apart. She walked out slowly, each click of her heels a countdown, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, until the door snicked closed and the house was quiet. Natalie slumped into a chair. Her hands trembled as she pressed them flat against the table, anchor points in a world that suddenly seemed unmoored. I'm so sorry, she whispered, voice cracking. I never wanted any of this. I knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine, warm and trembling. This isn't your fault, I said, each word deliberate as if I could will them into truth. She would have found a reason no matter what. This is who she is. We keep fighting. For Ben. Natalie nodded, but I saw the devastation in her eyes, the way her faith in family, always so careful, so hard-won, was being chipped away by someone who should have known better. Ethan came home later that afternoon, his face gray, his suit jacket rumpled. She called me at work, he said, voice hollow, said I was being very unwise, said I might be making myself unemployable in Dallas. That she could make a few calls, make me disappear. He looked at Natalie, anguish twisting his features. I'm so sorry, I should have seen it coming. Natalie took a shuddering breath. We're not backing down, Ethan. If you want to go, I'll understand, but He pulled her into his arms, shaking his head. We stay. We stay together. That night, Margaret's words hung over the house, seeping into every silence. Michael called from the office, whispering that he'd received a cryptic message from his mother as well. She's drawn the line, Lynn, he said, voice heavy with sorrow. It's us or her. I spent the evening at the kitchen table, sorting through the red folder, triple-checking every date, every name. Natalie made lists, cross-referencing doctors and treatments, jotting sticky notes as if each one might fend off another disaster. By midnight, the air was thick with exhaustion. Natalie curled on the couch beside Ben, tucking him in beneath the Spider-Man blanket. I watched her, my heart aching at the way she stroked his hair, murmuring quiet reassurances even as her own hands shook. I stood in the hallway, staring at my reflection in the dark window, my own face, sharp and unfamiliar, wreathed in pearl earrings and the harsh light of loneliness. 7 seconds passed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, before I turned away. The next morning, there was no word from Margaret, only a deafening silence. 7 days of it, broken only by the steady beep of Ben's monitors, the flutter of Natalie's sticky notes multiplying across the kitchen cabinets. Harold never called, nor did any of the other Carvers. Michael sat quietly at dinner, eyes downcast, and Ethan worked late, haunted. We didn't talk about the ultimatum out loud, but it lived everywhere, in the way Natalie hesitated before answering the phone, in the way I checked the mail with trembling hands, braced for another denial. We were, in every sense, alone. The Carver name, once a shield, had become a weight, dragging behind us as we fought for Ben 1 inch at a time. But Natalie never left, and I never stopped counting the seconds, not of silence but of resolve, of the space between Margaret's threats and our refusal to bend. In that emptiness, Natalie and I found something new. Not just the absence of family, but the presence of solidarity, of chosen loyalty, of a love fierce enough to withstand even the coldest silence. On the 8th day after Margaret's threat, I woke before dawn, the pale light barely pressing at the kitchen window, and found Natalie already awake, hunched over the table in her robe. A neat stack of new sticky notes, orange this time, sat beside her mug. She was cross-referencing medication schedules with the doctor's email, a mechanical pencil tapping out a soft, anxious rhythm. I took in the set of her jaw, drawn and determined, and in that moment I knew for certain there would be no going back to the old Carver family orbit. The silence from Margaret and Harold, the frozen phone lines, the returned birthday card, the Benner, 8/24 bouquet. It all belonged to another world. Couldn't sleep? I asked gently, settling in across from her. She shook her head, pushing her hair behind one ear, eyes rimmed pink. I kept dreaming I missed something, some line in the chart, some warning. Her voice trailed off and she pressed her lips together. I have to be sure, for Ben. You are, I told her, and I made my own quiet vow. Whatever it took, I would match her vigilance. That was the start of our campaign, 7 days of solitude dilating into months of relentless effort, calls, appeals, strategy sessions that bled into the early hours. I shifted my workload at the firm, carving out space for Ben's case. Michael made it clear that he would support us from the corners, coffee brewing in the mornings, dinners reheated in the evenings, his own way of holding the line. Ethan, too, found his footing. At first, his loyalty was hesitant, bruised by his mother's betrayal, but over time I saw the old steadiness return. The way he squeezed Natalie's hand in waiting rooms, the way he'd read to Ben in soft, patient tones, as if the whole world had shrunk to that hospital bed. The red folder became our talisman. Every email, every denial, every new piece of evidence was arranged by Natalie with ritual precision. She dotted each sticky note with the date and time, a teacher's order brought to a battlefield. Inside that folder, I started tracking more than just insurance responses. I logged every returned message from Harold 1511. Catherine Bowles, former bridge partner, turning pointedly away in the parking lot. Even the digital barbs. A Facebook comment from Margaret's friend group not mentioning names, but I knew, some people never know their place. #family values. May 25th, 8:48 p.m. None of it broke us. It only steeled us. Each morning, Natalie and I sat with coffee and our checklist reviewing the plan. On May 9th, the formal appeal went out. A 23-page brief tying every denial to a specific precedent, with Ben's medical history appended and a cover letter signed by both of us. We crossed our T's and dotted our I's, logging the submission time 9:02 a.m., with a fresh blue sticky note. I included a letter from Dr. Vance himself. In my expert opinion, delay in treatment will result in irreversible harm. Urgency is paramount. Photocopied into the folder, underlined twice by Natalie's careful hand. We split our days, Natalie at the hospital with Ben, overseeing his every vital and reaction, me at the law firm pacing conference calls between depositions and sending faxes, then returning to the hospital in the evenings to strategize. My partners at Carver and Bloom gave me space, some out of genuine concern. Others are the curs of Carver name in the news. It didn't matter. I had built my reputation on precise, unassailable work, and I called in every favor I'd earned over 3 decades. I wanted the hospital, and anyone else watching, to see that I would not bow to threats or family politics. Natalie, for her part, transformed heartbreak into action. Her classroom skills, meticulous lesson plans, calm amidst chaos, became weapons in our arsenal. She mapped out every step on a whiteboard she brought from her school. Timeline of action, appeal steps, contact list, grant deadlines. She color-coded the board, red for urgent issues, green for successes, yellow for setbacks. I added my own notes in black ink, legalese meeting teacher shorthand. Our world had shrunk to the kitchen, the hospital, and the steady accretion of evidence. June arrived in a blur of heat and hope. Ben's blood counts plateaued, then dipped again, and with each wobble my heart clenched. Natalie slept upright beside his bed, her notebook open on her lap, scribbled reminders, ask about dosage, check skin for rash. Tell Ben he is brave, still legible in the lamplight at 3 a.m. I took on the role of liaison, meeting with Dr. Vance and the research team, advocating for Ben's inclusion in the trial despite the bureaucratic obstacles. Whenever a nurse or administrator seemed reluctant, I produced the red folder and watched their tone shift, the armor of evidence too overwhelming to ignore. The weight of family exile pressed down, but in its place other voices rose up around us. Natalie's friend and fellow teacher, Miriam Green, dropped off casseroles and watched Ben so we could attend strategy calls. My own mentor, Barbara Allen, a retired judge, sharp-witted and fierce at 70, called weekly to check on progress, offering advice and once, the number of an old contact at the Texas Medical Board. Don't be afraid to rattle cages, Linda. You rattled mine enough back in the day. June 12, 6:33 p.m. Logged in folder under support, chosen family. Even Michael, never one for confrontation, found ways to help. He managed the household finances, shielding Natalie and Ethan from the worst of the mounting bills. Once he intercepted a courier envelope addressed to Mrs. Ethan Carver returned unopened from Margaret's address, June 17, 10:20 a.m. I logged it in the folder. Margaret returned Ben's get well card unopened. Noted. Yet with every new slight, Natalie and I only drew closer, an alliance forged in the cracks of the Carver legacy. We found joy in small things, the way Ben's eyes would light up for a story, the comfort of a familiar lullaby, the silent strength in Natalie's hand wrapped around mine during a midnight coffee break in the ICU. And in the rare moments when the house was truly still, I allowed myself to imagine a different future, a future where loyalty was not leveraged, where family meant standing with you in the trenches rather than judging from afar. Natalie felt it too, I could tell. Her laughter, when it came, was softer but more real than before. Her hugs lingered, full of gratitude and shared resolve. The hospital's resistance didn't end with the appeal. June 23, 4:05 p.m. Email from Karen Mendez, insurance coordinator. We regret, Ms. Carver, that we cannot process further invoices at this time. Hospital administration cited concerns raised by a family board member. Another sticky note, another log in the folder. Natalie was the first to suggest a countermeasure, a formal complaint to the Texas Department of Insurance, complete with hard copies of our correspondence and Dr. Vance's letters. I drafted the complaint. Natalie double-checked every attachment, initialed each one, and together we mailed it, June 25, 2:18 p.m., with receipts. We learned new skills as we went. Natalie mastered the nuances of hospital billing systems, deciphering cryptic codes on Ben's itemized bills, marking with red pen every $50 charge for miscellaneous services. I coached her on phrasing for public statements. She taught me how to build coalitions with the other parents in the pediatric ward. We became fixtures in the hospital's corridors, earning wary respect from staff unused to families who refused to fade quietly into the background. Once, in mid-July, a young resident hesitated outside Ben's room, shuffling papers. "You're Mrs. Carver's daughter?" he asked Natalie, uncertain. She looked at me, then back at him, voice strong. "I'm Ben's mother. This is his grandmother. And we're his advocates. Please let us know if there's any trouble with the trial paperwork." After he left, I squeezed her hand. "You never let them diminish you," I said in a whisper. "Not even for a second." She smiled, tired but full-hearted. "With you here, I don't have to." The days bled into one another. New filings, new setbacks, each one carefully documented. Early August brought another blow, a certified letter from Margaret's attorney, a Navesink attorney, and Sigismund. It cease and desist from using the Carver name in public appeals. Further action may result in litigation. It was an empty threat, but I felt the sting all the same. Natalie peeled off a fresh sticky note, her hands steady. "Add it to the folder," she said, and I did. But our resolve only grew. I escalated the case through legal channels, invoking Texas medical necessity statutes, demanding a hearing. Natalie spearheaded a campaign among the school community, rallying teachers and parents to write letters to the hospital board. We recorded every moment. August 10, 3:26 p.m., Mrs. Pruitt's letter, "Ben is a fighter, his family is his army." The folder expanded, bulging at the spine. It no longer held just our pain. It held our network, our proof, our power. Amidst it all, there were glimmers of hope. Mid-August, Ben's fever finally broke for a full 48 hours, enough for him to demand really pancakes for dinner. Natalie flipped them on the griddle while I pretended to critique her technique, and for a brief golden stretch, it felt like any normal Thursday night. "We should have pancakes every week," Ben declared, syrup painting his chin. "We'll make it a tradition," I promised, and Natalie caught my eye, gratitude bright and shining. School resumed in late August, and while Natalie took unpaid leave, her colleagues at Maple Oak Elementary organized a toy drive for Ben, August 23rd, 2:12 p.m., logged and photographed for the folder, a mountain of plush animals and coloring books. The PTA sent a card signed by every staff member, and Miriam texted daily updates from her classroom, looping Natalie into the rhythms of the world she missed. I saw the cracks in Natalie's armor on the hardest days when insurance sent another denial, or when Margaret posted a cryptic status on social media, hinting at ungrateful branches and the dangers of disloyalty. Like Streeps of 7, Litkermeet. Filed. Those were the nights I'd find Natalie sitting on the back porch, knees tucked to her chest, staring into the Texas dusk. "I never thought I'd lose a mother twice," she confessed one evening, voice ragged. "First mine to cancer, and now." She never finished the thought, but I understood. I sat beside her, the cicadas humming, and rested my head on her shoulder. "You haven't lost me," I whispered. "You never will." We built new rituals, nightly check-ins, gratitude lists, short walks around the hospital garden with Ben when he was strong enough to leave his bed. We sent update emails to allies, Barbara, Miriam, Michael's friends from the accounting firm, each one another thread in our growing tapestry of support. I wrote legal briefs on hospital letterhead, Natalie edited them for clarity, and together we built an unassailable wall of advocacy. By September, the hospital could no longer ignore us. The local news picked up Ben's story after another family in the ward reached out to a reporter friend. The article ran online with the headline, "Dallas Family Fights Hospital Bureaucracy to Save Child's Life." Sept. 12th, 6:41 a.m., featured in folder, along with a printout of supportive comments. 137 in total, 3 negative, each annotated by Natalie. The public pressure forced the administration's hand. A special ethics committee convened to review Ben's case. Natalie and I attended together, the red folder in my hands, our timeline color-coded and indexed. We spoke in measured tones, never raising our voices, presenting our evidence with the practiced calm of survivors who had nothing left to lose. After the hearing, as we waited in a quiet corridor, Natalie reached for my hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, voice barely audible over the air-conditioning hum. "Choosing this fight? Choosing me?" I turned to her, pearl earrings catching the sterile light. "Not for 1 second," I said, steady as a verdict. The committee ruled in our favor 2 days later, September 15th, 1:34 p.m., documented in the folder. Ben would receive the treatment, the insurance required to cover it under medical necessity, all appeals exhausted. The victory was not absolute. Margaret sent a lone email that evening, September 15th, 7:22 p.m., subject line blank, body terse, "Do not contact me further." I printed it, added a sticky note, "Closure," of a sort, and slid it into the red folder alongside every other proof of our journey. The betrayals. The triumphs, the receipts. With the worst of the battle behind us, life resumed its fragile rhythm. Ben's health improved week by week, his smile returning, the shadows beneath Natalie's eyes fading by degrees. Ethan came home earlier. Michael's laughter returned to the dinner table, and the Carver name began to mean something new, something earned, not inherited. Through it all, the red folder never left my side. It was battered now, the gloss dulled by fingerprints, but within it lived the record of our fight. Every slight, every kindness, every minute logged and marked. I saw in its pages the shape of our real family, not the Carver bloodline, but the one built from loyalty, courage, and the shared determination to refuse silence. One evening, after tucking Ben into bed, Natalie found me paging through the folder at the kitchen table, lost in thought. "What will you do with it?" she asked softly, brushing her fingers along the battered edge. I closed it, feeling its weight anchor me. "Keep it," I said, "so we never forget. So if anyone tries to rewrite this story, we'll have the truth." She smiled, leaning down to hug me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of it." In that moment, I knew we had won, not because we'd bested Margaret or forced the hospital to yield, but because we'd chosen each other over and over in every silent second that passed. And no folder, no legacy, no 7 seconds of cold silence could ever take that from us. The first cool breeze of October slipped through the kitchen window as I rinsed blueberries for Ben's afternoon snack. He was 8 now, legs all gangly energy, laughter echoing down the hallway as he chased a remote control car over the polished floorboards. The house was brighter than it had been in years, painted in hopeful colors, the scent of cinnamon and printer paper, and a dozen school art projects taped to the fridge. I'd just finished reviewing a new pro bono case when my phone buzzed. an unfamiliar number, local. For a moment, I froze. The red hospital folder sat on the bookshelf still, a relic and a talisman. I didn't reach for it, just braced myself, counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then I answered. Linda Carver speaking. A thin, careful silence. Then Margaret's voice, crisp and lacquered, as perfectly pitched as ever. Linda, darling, it's been too long. I could taste copper at the back of my tongue, a memory surfacing with unwelcome force. It had been years since her last message. The blank email I'd filed under closure, of a sort. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Is something wrong? She laughed, a brittle musical sound. I should hope not. Why must you always jump to the direst conclusions? I was calling with good news. Harold and I have been invited to the annual Carver Foundation luncheon. And, well, it seems there's quite a bit of buzz about our family's philanthropic efforts, particularly regarding Ben's story. My grip on the phone tightened. Our efforts? Margaret, you haven't seen Ben in 3 years? A tiny sigh, just audible. Linda, there's no need to dredge up the past. Water under the bridge, I hear Ben's health is quite improved, thanks to the grant and all that. It's wonderful what modern medicine can do, isn't it? I heard footsteps behind me, Natalie pausing in the doorway, concern shadowing her face. I pressed the speaker button, nodding for her to listen. Margaret's voice sharpened. We're in a rather unique position this year. The foundation has allocated a new round of pediatric medical grants, $50,000, earmarked for children who exemplify the Carver spirit. Imagine, Linda, what a statement it would make if Ben's story were featured. I've spoken to the board, of course, and they're quite keen on a family appearance. Natalie's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. I kept my own voice level. You're asking us to put Ben on display after you tried to cut us out entirely. A laugh. Oh, Linda, don't be melodramatic. I had my reservations about certain choices, but that's what families do. They disagree, then move on. We can't live in the past. Besides, the foundation takes these things seriously. There's even talk of endowing a medical trust in Ben's name. Naturally, I'd oversee it, at least for the first few years. Experience matters, after all. Natalie stepped forward, her voice icy. You want to manage Ben's trust after what you did? Margaret didn't miss a beat. Natalie, dear, let's not revisit unpleasantness. I did what I thought was best at the time. We all did. And look how well things turned out. Ben thrived, didn't he? Frankly, your persistence was admirable. Stubborn, certainly, but in hindsight, perhaps necessary. The gall of it threatened to choke me. I swallowed, forcing myself to breathe, to count. Margaret filled the silence. The board meets Friday. I'll need your signatures so we can expedite the paperwork. We don't want to appear disorganized. There are interviews scheduled, photographs to arrange. Oh, and the hospital would like a statement from you, Linda, about how the Carvers came together during Ben's crisis. It's all rather inspiring. Are you even listening to yourself? Natalie's voice broke, brittle, but she stood tall. You haven't called, written, sent a card in 3 years. You returned Ben's birthday invitations unopened. You threatened legal action against me. Margaret text, a mother hen scolding a wayward chick. That was all unfortunate, yes. But bygones, Natalie. Ben is my grandson, and the Carver family is, if nothing else, resilient. Nobody outside needs to know about little disagreements. It's for the greater good, don't you see? The Carver name means something in Dallas. You want what's best for Ben, don't you? I found my equilibrium in the familiar rhythm of her manipulation, the way she pressed every button with a surgeon's precision, wielding shame, then praise, then feigned magnanimity. What exactly is it you want, Margaret? My voice was as cold as the marbled counter beneath my palm. A beat, then the truth, wrapped in velvet. I want us to present a united front. With my connections, Ben's story could secure him a future, college, medical care, all the support he'll ever need, and it would reflect so well on all of us. But the board insists on family involvement. So, let's be reasonable. A little photo, a few words for the press, and I'll take care of the rest. Natalie's fists trembled at her sides. No, you don't get to rewrite what happened. Oh, Natalie, Margaret crooned, don't be so dramatic. If you'd just let me guide things from the start, all this mess could have been avoided. But you were determined to make a public spectacle, letters to the paper, appeals, dragging the Carver name through mud. I forgave you. Now it's your turn. I felt a rush of heat. Forgiveness isn't yours to offer. We did what was right for Ben, no matter how it looked to your friends. Perception is everything, Linda. I thought, after your little experience on the outside, you'd understand that. It's all very well to play the martyr, but reputations last. Don't let pride rob Ben of what's being offered now. The sound of Ben's laughter drifted from the hallway, a sharp contrast to the ice of the conversation. I pictured his face bright and unburdened, and knew I would never hand him over as a prop in Margaret's redemption campaign. Natalie's voice went suddenly soft, dangerous. Is this about Ben or about you? A pause, only a split second, but I heard the calculation. Of course it's about Ben. The Carvers always look after their own. We can put everything behind us if you just cooperate. I can ensure Ben's trust is managed properly. There's talk of more funding in the next cycle. If we play our cards right, he could have every opportunity. And if we refuse? I asked quietly. Her tone chilled. I'd hate for Ben to miss out on such a gift. Foundations can be particular. Grants are never guaranteed. Other families are eager for this spotlight. Don't let stubbornness cost him his future. Think of Ethan's career too. Opportunities come and go. Natalie's mouth twisted. So we parade Ben, sign away control, and you get to be the savior. Margaret's voice sweetened. You have to be realistic, Natalie. I've been managing family trusts for decades. You're a teacher. Surely you see the value in expertise? Let me do what I do best. We all benefit. You'll be remembered as part of something grand. I looked at Natalie, saw her shoulders rise with a deep, steadying breath. She nodded. I drew myself up, feeling my own practiced courtroom calm settle over me like a cloak. I'll consider your proposal, I said, voice flat. But we won't sign anything without reviewing every detail. And Ben's interests come before anyone else's legacy. If you want to proceed, you'll meet us at the house. No lawyers, no press, just family. A sigh, as if inconvenienced. Very well, Linda. Friday then, 1 p.m., and do have the boy presentable. We want the papers to see his best side, don't we? The call ended. For a long time, only the hum of the refrigerator and the distant click of Ben's car echoed through the kitchen. Natalie collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. She hasn't changed at all. No, I agreed, smoothing my skirt, the nerves bright in my gut but masked by habit. But we have. And this time, we have every receipt. That night, Natalie and I sat at the dining table. The red hospital folder opened between us. She added a new sticky note in her neat teacher's hand. Oct 10:04:03 p.m., Margaret returns. Request photo op, trust control, hospital grant. Condition, full family cooperation. Threat implied, career, future grants, public perception. We read it together, the ink still wet. When she comes, Natalie whispered, promise me we won't let her take a single piece of this from Ben. Not the money, not the story, not a moment of his childhood. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine, feeling the warmth of solidarity. I promise. Whatever she tries, we answer with the truth. Outside, the Texas sky was streaked with stars, an ordinary night after an extraordinary day. I listened to Ben's laughter echo down the hall, and I felt the old weight pressing close. The legacy of silence, the manipulation that had once nearly broken us. This time, though, I wasn't afraid. Our proof was ironclad, our unity unshakable, and no matter what Margaret tried, she could not buy her way back into the family she'd abandoned, nor rewrite the story we'd lived. When I finally closed the folder for the night, I felt the quiet certainty of chosen family settle in my bones. We would show up for Ben, and for each other, no matter how the numbers changed. Let Margaret bring her cameras, her lawyers, her carefully scripted apologies. We had something she could never understand, a record of truth, and the courage to show it, page by page. Friday came dressed in a brittle blue sky, the kind Dallas saves for its harshest reckonings. I woke before sunrise, nerves jangling, hands folded tight against a mug of black coffee as I watched the street from the kitchen window. Our house was scrubbed and silent. Michael had taken Ben to the park for the morning so Natalie and I could be ready. She moved through the house with quiet focus, tucking away stray toys, setting a pitcher of water and a plate of lemon cookies on the dining table as if staging a polite parent-teacher conference and not a confrontation decades in the making. At 12:30, Natalie appeared in the doorway, her hair swept into a low chignon neat as a school administrator. She wore her favorite dress, dark green cinched at the waist, and the delicate gold locket Ben had given her last Christmas. There was resolve in the set of her chin, but I saw the flicker of worry in her eyes as she smoothed invisible wrinkles from her skirt. I set the red folder in the center of the table, its battered corners and thick spine as familiar now as my own hands. We don't let her steer this, I said quietly. She plays by our rules, or not at all. Natalie nodded, pressing her lips together. Her hands, so steady with a pencil or a thermometer, betrayed a faint tremor as she stacked the last of her color-coded sticky notes across from mine. She glanced at the clock. 12:52. She'll be early, Natalie said. She always is. She was right. At 12:56, Margaret's Lexus glided up the drive, tires whispering against the concrete. I saw myself years ago hovering by this very window, waiting for her approval, or, more accurately, her disapproval, which always arrived on time. I braced my shoulders, feeling the old anxiety flicker through me, then snuffed it out with practiced discipline. Margaret swept into the house as if nothing had changed, her perfume arriving first, gardenia, sharp and powdery. She wore dove gray from head to toe, a tailored suit over a white silk blouse, and her pearl pin glinted in the noon light. Harold trailed after her, silent, gaunt, his eyes flicking everywhere but ours. She took in the scene, the spotless house, the cookies, the waiting folder, and allowed herself a thin, approving smile. How lovely, Margaret said. You've even managed refreshments. Thoughtful, Linda. Shall we? She pulled out a chair and sat, crossing her ankles with precision. Harold sat one seat away, hands folded like a supplicant. I slid the red folder in front of my place, careful and deliberate. Before we discuss anything, there are a few points I'd like clarified. Margaret's eyes narrowed, a flicker of annoyance quickly masked. Linda, let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. The foundation is on a tight schedule. We have photographers arriving at 2. I heard the click of Natalie's pen, saw the tiny shudder in her breath as she opened her notepad and drew a line down the center of the first page. I met Margaret's gaze, holding it. This won't take long, and I won't have Ben, or any of us, paraded in front of a camera until the air is clear. We are prepared, Margaret. We have every document, every message, every moment logged and dated. She let her eyes flick to the folder, but her voice remained honey smooth. If you insist. But do be quick, darling. I opened the folder, the whiff of paper and ink grounding me. I drew the first item out, a printout, highlighter slashing across the header. May 2nd, 2023, I began, my voice neutral and cold as a courtroom. Insurance denial for Ben's prescribed treatment. Experimental status cited, $128,000 denied. That's the letter we received after weeks of medical urgency, which you were well aware of. Margaret's smile didn't flicker. I recall there were issues with coverage, yes, very unfortunate. Natalie slid the next piece across the table, a pale yellow sticky note, Natalie's looping script visible even from a distance. I let her speak. May 3rd, 2:13 p.m. I was on hold with insurance when your name was mentioned. The administrator confirmed contact from Mrs. Mine. Carver, hospital board member, that same day the denial came through, citing board guidance. Natalie's voice was unshakable, a teacher reciting a lesson she'd known by heart for years. Margaret's lips pursed. You must have misheard. I expressed concern, nothing more. I'm sure you understand. The hospital sees many desperate families. It's important not to let hope cloud judgment. I ignored the dig, pulling out the next receipt. An email chain, messages stacked and time-stamped. Here are the 11 exchanges between myself, Natalie, and the hospital board between May 2 and May 15th. Note the language shift after your call. Administrators citing board member input, urging us to accept more conventional care options, and referencing family unity. I let the silence stretch for 7 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I saw Margaret's fingers tighten infinitesimally on the edge of the table. The night you visited us, Margaret, April 16, I continued, sliding forward Natalie's note from that evening. You assured us you would handle everything if it came to it. We now know what that meant, advising the board to prioritize optics, not Ben's health. Margaret's eyes flicked to Harold, then back at me. She feigned confusion. My only concern was for Ben. Sometimes emotion clouds reason. I won't apologize for wanting to protect the family's name. Natalie's voice, soft but steel-edged. You threatened Ethan's job, Michael's standing at the firm. You told us if we didn't comply, there'd be consequences for all of us. Your words, May 5th, 3:02 p.m., recorded on my phone. I have the audio if you'd like to hear your tone. Margaret's composure slipped for a heartbeat. I was agitated. You must understand, the pressure was immense. I pressed forward, my tone never rising. You sent a cease and desist August 7th, 11:13 a.m., attempting to bar us from advocating under the Carver name, empty legal threat, but telling in its intent. You also returned Ben's get well card June 17th, 10:20 a.m., unopened and marked refused, not at this address. We have photographs of the envelope for the record. At that, Harold hunched lower, as if shrinking beneath the weight of it. Margaret drew herself taller. You're making this unnecessarily adversarial, Linda. None of this is relevant now. The foundation is ready to support Ben, to celebrate the family's resilience. But not the truth, I interrupted. When Ben's story made the news, September 2023, you sent a one-line email. Do not contact me further. No apology, no regret. Not a single outreach since. And yet now, with a $50,000 grant and a chance to control Ben's trust on the line, you appear at our door, demanding signatures and photo ops. Margaret's color rose. Public relations matter, Linda. Perception shapes opportunity. If we present as a united family, Ben's future... Natalie's voice sliced through. His future is not a platform for your image. You abandoned him, and us, when it counted. Every sticky note, every entry in this folder proves who showed up, who counted the seconds of silence, who cared. I drew the final document from the folder, Dr. Vance's handwritten note, the one he'd scrawled on hospital stationery in red pen, underlining urgency is paramount. I said it before Margaret like a closing argument. This is what mattered, not your reputation. Not the Carver legacy, Ben's life, which you tried, repeatedly, to jeopardize for pride. The room quivered with the force of 7 more seconds of silence. Margaret sat perfectly still, her eyes shining but hard. Harold cleared his throat, voice thin. Margaret, perhaps. He trailed off, silenced by her glare. Natalie leaned forward, her voice low and unwavering. You want the world to believe you saved Ben? But our proof is here. Every message, every denial, every ounce of support you withheld. We are not signing over control of his trust. We are not handing Ben to you for a ribbon cutting, and we are certainly not rewriting this story. I closed the folder with a gentle snap, the sound final as a gavel. You may attend the luncheon if you wish, as Ben's grandmother, but you will not manage his trust, nor will you speak to the press on his behalf. If you push this further, we will provide the hospital and the foundation with this entire record. The real story, Margaret, every timestamp, every threat, every day you chose silence over solidarity. Margaret's voice, when she finally found it, was ice over gravel. You would disgrace the family name just to spite me? I met her gaze, calm and utterly unyielding. No, Margaret, I'm teaching Ben what family truly means. We stand with those who stand with us. We keep the receipts. We remember. She rose, slow and regal, as if unwilling to let defeat touch her. Her hands, no longer perfectly steady, closed around her purse. You have made a grave mistake, Linda. I stood as well, smoothing my skirt with hands that did not tremble. No. The mistake was thinking power would always trump love. There's the door. Margaret stared at us, a full 7 seconds stretching between us. I counted every one, feeling each tick like a freed heartbeat. She turned without a word, Harold struggling to rise and follow. I watched them leave, the sun flashing on the Lexus windshield as it retreated down the drive. Natalie sank into a chair, letting her head fall into her hands, relief and grief pooling in equal measure. I gathered the red folder, warm now from the heat of our hands and the truth burning inside. I set it on the sideboard, the last line in a ledger I hoped we would never have to open again. For a long moment the house was silent, the only sound the distant laughter of Ben and Michael returning from the park, unburdened, innocent, free. I breathed in slow and deliberate, counting once more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This time, each second was a promise, not of silence, but of loyalty, chosen and fiercely kept. For a long time, neither Natalie nor I moved. I heard the front door swing closed and the engine of Margaret's Lexus catch, the mechanical purr dissolving at the end of the block. The air in the dining room felt charged ozone after a storm, and I realized my shoulders were aching, locked tight from the effort of holding every boundary. Beside me, Natalie let out a ragged sigh, the kind that pulls old wounds to the surface and lets them go. She pushed her hair back, voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe she really thought we'd just hand it all over after everything. I touched her hand gently, the same way I would steady a witness on the stand. She spent her whole life believing her silence was enough to erase the truth. She'll never understand what it cost us to keep going. Natalie's eyes shone, but it wasn't only exhaustion. There was victory there too, subtle, a glint of steel behind the tears. She reached for the red folder, tracing the battered edge with her thumb. I always thought I'd have to fight alone. That, somehow, if I just tried hard enough, she'd accept me. But she never even saw me until I stood up to her. She never saw any of us, I said, and I meant it for every child, every wife, every soul who'd ever been measured and found wanting in Margaret's cold accounting. We sat in the hush, the late sun painting gold across the kitchen floor. The voices of Ben and Michael drifted in from the yard. Ben's high, bright with a story about grasshoppers and superheroes. Michael's low, gentle, answering with a careful patience he'd honed through years of watching numbers add up or fall short. For once I let myself lean back and simply listen, letting the warmth slip through the cracks Margaret had left behind. Natalie wiped her eyes, then smiled, tired but proud. He's going to remember this when he's older, isn't he? That we didn't let her win. I squeezed her hand. He'll remember that you fought, that we fought, that when no one else showed up, we built something stronger than her silence. The clock on the wall ticked, each second a little lighter than the last. The house felt different now. Freed, somehow, reclaimed from the shadow of old expectations. I thought of every sticky note, every email, every 7-second pause that had once threatened to drown us. I thought of the laughter from the yard, the folder thick with proof, and the gentle certainty of Natalie beside me. Michael came in first, dusting grass from his jeans, Ben trailing a step behind with a fistful of clover. We missed anything exciting? Michael asked, his smile tentative. I glanced at Natalie, and together we answered, just what needed to be said. Ben pounced onto my lap, arms thrown around my neck, breathless with something urgent and utterly ordinary. Grandma, can we have pancakes for dinner? I laughed, the last of the tension breaking. I think that's exactly what we need. Michael set out plates, Natalie ruffled Ben's hair, and I slid the red folder to its resting place on the bookshelf. I'd keep it, yes, but I no longer needed it as a shield. It was a testament now, not a weapon. As the skillet hissed and the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon, I watched my family, the true family chosen and kept, and understood, perhaps for the first time, what Margaret never could. Family is not the people who share your surname, or the ones who measure worth in silence and reputation. It is the ones who stand beside you, who count the seconds with you, who never let go even when the world turns cold. We ate pancakes as the sun dropped behind the cedars, laughter echoing through the house, proof enough that love, real love, doesn't need a legacy to endure.